Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about animating rigs with a traditional mindset in Moho, presented by Joel Mayer. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. General information, this webinar is being recorded and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel. You can ask questions using the question panel. Our chat is just for merely information, so use the question panel to send us a doubt or a question. Also, due to time constraint, we'll try to answer all of your questions, but we'll do our best. We have 15 minutes. Also, the panelists are Mario Quiñones, myself, Victor Paredes, and our presenter, Joel Mayer. Also, we encourage you to tag us in your Instagram stories, adding the hashtag webinar, hashtag Moho Animation, at Joel Mayer Art, and also at Moho Animation. We'll be sharing your stories if you tag us. Joel Mayer is an animator and communication designer born and living in Basel, Switzerland. He's creative director and responsible for animated content in the communications department of Migros Industrie, a subsidiary of Migros Switzerland, largest retail company and private employer. He also does freelance work for independent animation projects and develops his own intellectual properties. So with that, I will leave you with Joel and his presentation, Animating Rigs with the Traditional Mindset in Moho. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Mario. Let me just share my screen here. I hope you can all see my presentation. So hello, everybody. Nice to have you. Thanks for showing up. Today, I'm going to talk about something that actually I myself have only been really getting into over the last, I would say, year or something. And that is how to get the best of both worlds when you work with rigs, but you basically have a traditional animation background. Let me just start off with a short disclaimer. I usually do this because you know how it is with these things. It's all, to an extent, just a personal opinion. It's all based on my own background and also my own goals with my work. You know, those may differ with you. And specifically, my goal has always been, since I do both traditional and rigged animation, it was always about, I wish I had the flexibility, the freedom, and also the look of traditional animation a bit more with my rigged stuff. So that's basically my findings that I'm going to present to you today. And different styles, interests, tastes require different methods. With that said, let me just take a little quick look back with my history with Moho, because I think it's important to understand the context a little bit, how we all got here. So I'm not quite sure anymore, but I think my very first version that I ever owned of Moho, back then it was called Anime Studio, was probably version 6. And that was probably around 2007, so I'm aging myself here a little bit. But back then it looked like this actually, so not that dissimilar to how it looks today. And the reason why I bought it was because I saw this show reel. The old timers among us will probably remember this. This was all done by a studio called Freakish Kid. And I saw this stuff and I was like, I can't believe this is rigged. This looks so close to frame by frame. I think obviously I had visions of grandeur and was thinking I can basically do Disney quality animation all by myself, thanks to the rigging process that takes off a lot of the work. So my mind was pretty much blown, and I got Moho, and pretty quickly I was like, how do you do this? Because what I would do, and I think this is something a lot of beginners fall into the trap of, I would rig and rig and rig and rig some more, because obviously, it's all in the rigging. And then when I would try to animate the thing, it will, very quickly fall apart. So I still stuck with Moho though. I've been using it now probably for over 10 years, mainly for my day job, as Mario said, in communications, doing corporate film and so on. because there we have really quick turnovers and we have to produce stuff, fast, and it has to stay flexible. So why do we use rigs? Because we have reusable parts, for example. We can do more animation in less time. It's easier for consistent volumes. Everybody among you who's also a traditional animator knows the problem with, keeping volumes consistent from one drawing to the next. That's a big one. There's no cleanup, no coloring process. There's more work up front with the rigging and everything. But if you look at any credits of your favorite 2D animated movie, you will see the longest list is usually the cleanup department. Victor can probably confirm this from Cartoon Saloon. And the flexibility, because we have clients and we animate something and then they say, well, can it be like 2 pixels to the left? If you would have to do this in, well, I guess that would even be easy with traditional animation, but you just have the ultimate flexibility with rigs, and it's easy to adjust things after the fact. Let's just quickly compare the two workflows, roughly, obviously this is just a very broad overview. There's multiple in-between steps and before and after that. But when we look at how traditional animation is usually made, the animator starts out with a thumbnail. He usually gets a layout from the layout department or just storyboards. He does his keys or his extremes. In traditional, actually, keys and extremes are two different things, but just for the sake of simplicity, we'll call them keys. Then he breaks it down, he charts it, this little spacing in between charts. He gives it off to an in-between or in-betweens it himself, maybe adds some straight ahead fluff. Then it goes to cleanup, and then it goes to coloring. How does this compare to cutout? Just a short note here. I'm that old that I will call this stuff cutout. You can call it puppet animation, rigged animation. When I talk about cutout, all I mean is just, stuff that you would do in a software like Moho. Anyway, so obviously you're gonna model and design the thing, you're gonna rig it, and then you're gonna animate it, and you're gonna export, right? And success. So obviously here is where all the creative decisions are made, right? In the modeling and design stage. That's what I thought, at least. So I was thinking to myself, all right, so if I want to do better looking Moho stuff, all I gotta do is get better at rigging. And I tried and tried, and no matter what, first of all, to be quite honest with you, it just simply wasn't very fun to me personally. And second of all, I couldn't get the results I was really after. Then I went back, to my initial inspirations, back to Freakish Kid, and I found on the web archives, actually, that's the only thing I ever saw of them that's a behind the scenes screenshot, basically. And that's from their Nickelodeon little series that they did, Clucky the Vampire Chicken. And if you look at these wireframes, back then the computers were so slow, we had to animate in wireframes and then press Command R all the time to even see what Moho was doing. But it's really not a complex model, there's really not much to it. It's a great design, obviously, but there is nothing hidden up the sleeves. Basically, on a technical level, not on an artistic one, but on a technical level, there was nothing to these models that I couldn't do already. So, and the other thing that was kind of an eye-opener is all this stuff was done with Moho 5. And those of us old enough, Moho 5 had no smart bones, no motion graph, no deformers, no curvers, no Vitruvian bones. It really barely had anything. It had a vector deformation, and it had bones, and it had switch layers. That's it, basically. So I was thinking, well, it really can't be about the rigging then, because they could get such great animation that still looks good with such, simple tools. And then the revelation came when I kind of dug through the good old Moho forums, that existed since back in the day. And I found this old post by Stu Gamble from Freakish Kid. And what he said there was, when people asked him about how their process was, is, we take the poses from the board, the storyboard, clean those up to create keyframes, then we'll animate between the keys to create the sequence. It takes longer in prep, but the animation is much more defined and quicker. I really like that word defined, I think that's actually something really essential. So I was like, okay, maybe I had it all wrong. And at the same time, something else was happening in my traditional workflow. I was watching some Aaron Blaise videos, and I saw him do this, basically. he would start out the scene by just drawing a sequence of little simple thumbnail sketches. Then he would take those sketches and blow them up on the digital timeline and use those already as his first storytelling keys, so to speak. So I tried this myself, and this little cat animation that I did last year was basically, it looks somewhat complex, but it all really started out with these 4 drawings. I took those drawings like a comic strip and blew them up, obviously refined them and cleaned them up and so on. But that really gave me the starting point to animate this whole thing. So then it got me thinking, I probably got it all wrong, because the creative decisions, even with traditional animation, obviously there are decisions being made after that, but really the essence of your scene is being made in the thumbnail and the layout stages, all else is execution. So what if we take that stage and add it to the cutout process? Instead of diving straight in and model and rig, we start out by planning things out. And not only that, but we add a few more steps there to really craft our animation, The secret really is in the planning and not in the rigging, and in being a good animator. Nobody can, no software can take that, can do that for you. You kind of have to understand the principles to really get, to a point where it all looks better and better. The other secret, which is probably not so much of a secret, is really I'm not a very good rigger, to be honest. I can almost guarantee that pretty much everyone in this webinar today probably knows as much about Moho's tools than I do. Maybe something is I kind of know what I want, and I know it from the get-go. But how do I find out what I want? So step 1, since I did some tutorials about Moho as well in the past, sometimes I have newcomers ask me, where should I use a smart bone? Where should I use this? Which bone? Which is the right bone to do there? I always say, close Moho, close your computer, take out a piece of paper and the closest drawing utensil that you have, and just brainstorm, just draw out what you actually want to do, what shall happen in your scene. These are examples. This is usually how I start out my storyboards. I still do it on paper because it just freeze, because as soon as you're going digital, you start fiddling around, you start being perfectionistic, and I just really want, it's not really drawing, it's almost like note-taking with symbols. And so let's see how this could work in a Moho workflow. So I had this little fish character here that I used for an explainer video I did at work. And these are my simple storyboards. So we have the fish coming in from the right. He kisses the claim here, is like kind of happy and swims off screen. All right, so what does this tell us, when it comes to rigging? So I know, okay, the fish has to probably move his fins around. He has to have a kissy face. He has to have a happy face, more or less, and he has to. I want him to stretch a little bit, when he swims off, and there should be some bubbles floating around. So after I had this, then I would go into the rigging stage, and now this fish probably only works in the context of this scene because it performs exactly the actions that I want him to do, because if I would have just started rigging a fish, I would have never thought of giving him a specific kissy face because why would I, right? So maybe I would have started to do all kinds of deformers and weird smart bones to, move the mouth around as much as possible. But here I just really knew what I wanted. So, and this was basically the final scene then, when it was animated. Kisses the thing and swims off. So start up here, that's the first lesson that I learned, really forget about rigging or anything, start with your planning stage and not here. But enough of slides for now, because I'm sure you kind of want to see, the proofs in the pudding. So let me switch over to Moho for a second, and let me get this GoWebinar panel out of the way. So I brought 3 examples more or less today. And the first one I want to look at is this little guy that was recently posted on the socials. And we really start from the top, So how would I start out? I would draw some thumbnails. It can be in Moho. Moho has some great new freehand tools. In my case, I usually draw them in another software or on my iPad, just because I take every opportunity I can to get away from my computer. I would import those those drawings and time them out on the Moho timeline as a frame by frame layer. And then we end up with something like this. So the whole idea about this guy is basically, it's the situation. It happens to me pretty often because I'm really bad with names. So it often happens at work that I'm on the phone with somebody that I'm talking to for the first time, and then comes the moment to say goodbye, and I'm like, oh, goodbye, Mr. Rurada, and just hope that I kind of phonetically more or less was, was on the right side. Anyway, so he's here. Ah, yes, thank you, fine, goodbye. Starts hanging up the phone, Mr. Harbour, drops the phone, Smith, and then, as a ultimate humiliation, his speech bubble pops and flies away. So you see, I mean, these are really, if we're honest, crappy drawings basically, but they already tell me so much, because now I know, okay, I want him, like this character to me is kind of a flamboyant guy, right? So kind of almost like an English gentleman. I want him to really have that nice mouth shape here when he opens it. He needs to have a phone in his hand. I need a chair, a table, and the phone has to be able to drop onto the handle in the end. And I probably need around 3 or 4 eye positions. So I don't need to bother with, rigging up pupils or anything like that. I already know what I need, And then you end up with something like this. So this is what I came up with. I took those poses from my thumbnails and I had a battle plan now, and I knew what I needed. So he had to be able to, to smile and to frown. I had different mouth shapes for just random, really just random letters that I thought looked good, and this is again the special case, because in the end when he just gives up saying the name, just goes like. So I just had his tongue coming out here, and this is like his gesture, and this is the second quizzical when he looks up and sees the speech bubble flying away. Same thing here with the phone. I knew he will hang it up by the end, so I knew the phone would have to turn like this. But you see, it's really not a complex rig. I just added some stretches and some target bones just for convenience sake. But other than that, there's really not that much to it. The only thing I like to do is sometimes I like to rig my eyebrows instead of putting them into a smart bone, because honestly, the eyes are basically where most of the expression happens, where most of the acting happens. I mean, you can smile in lots of different ways, and your eyebrows and your eyes really give away what you really mean. Is it a sarcastic smile or is it genuine, and so on. Another example I can show is this little beach girl here. This I drew on my iPad, and as you can see, I only bothered to clean up the first frame somewhat, just so I had a rough, idea of what she would look like. But basically, she's at the beach, takes out a huge sandwich and eats it. And that's really how far I have gotten. And then I ended up making up some stuff after that, but I'll show you that later. But as you can see, it's really not pretty drawings. Those are really just for yourself, to get an idea. But I already, with her, I already did a few more poses. And when she comes back here, I already watched a little bit that she has nice arcs, because I knew I wanted to get this, emphasizing this. What I usually even do is, before I rig anything, I make myself a little plan. I analyze my thumbnails again, and I just write it down. Okay, I need these smart bones, I need these hands and arms, I need these mouth switches, and then I just work my way through it, until I end up with a rig. In this case, it looks like this. Yeah, and again, here I didn't bother rigging the eyebrows, but therefore I bothered. I bothered with. I knew I wanted some funny expressions when she's like chewing, very unladylike. So I put some pin bones in here to really be able to manually, make some funny expressions there. it's really, you know, every case is different. It really is whatever works. Then I put some pin bones in here as well because I knew she would be looking down a little bit. So instead of getting that all to work with smart bones, I thought that's just easier if I just sculpt this, you know, basically with a couple of pin bones and make sure that it works. I knew the head would go up and down because she would probably look down at the basket, she would look up. Then, since she has sunglasses, I knew I couldn't get that much expression going on. So I thought, you know what, I will just do a squash and stretch on the sunglasses here and there. Same with the eyebrows, and obviously with the business, you know, same thing. If she bends down, then it has to kind of work in perspective. All right. And this one was this one was kind of funny because I animated this like probably like 2 or 3 years ago, and the only thing that survived is this little movie file here. This was basically just a crazy giraffe walk, and you can see there's a black frame flashing because the movie file was actually corrupted, so I didn't even have the whole thing anymore. And this is super rough, you know, but again, it pretty much tells me everything I need to know what I need to rig. So I see, okay, I need a stretch thing here. When he bangs his head down, he needs to be able to bend his necks in certain ways, and you know, you end up with something like this. With this guy, I did a little experiment because I was thinking back to, you know, Moho 5 and all that kind of stuff, and I told myself, you know what, I'm going to try to do something without any sort of smart bones. So what's actually happening here is this guy just has a huge deformer on his head that I ended up stretching around. You can see it looks really kind of scary. That I just ended up stretching around to get these, you know, to get these stretch motions. To be honest, looking back on it, I wouldn't really suggest doing it that way. Now I probably would just do a Vitruvian bone and do a second pair of neck and head because it's just faster to animate. But yeah, here we are. All right, so let's go back to this guy for a second. So we have him all rigged up. What's the next step? Well, you can see down here, I already have a set of keyframes. So what I usually do is I go through and in step mode, without any interpolation, I just do my main keyframes. And if it works in that stage, then I can be pretty sure that it will probably work once it's in between. So why do I do this in step mode? Well, honestly, if you start animating with Moho already interpolating stuff, you kind of lose sight of the big picture, in my opinion, because already you're like fighting against the computer and, oh, what is Moho doing there? Why is this weird? This is falling apart. So just starting out in step mode and really taking things, no pun intended, step by step, is really helpful to just not, you know, to just concentrate on the essential things, basically. But we will go into more detail afterwards as well. And same thing, yeah, well, her first frame is now unfortunately not the right one anymore because I played around with it. But same thing with her. Oh, what I should have mentioned is with her, I actually did a lot of different arm positions because she has some smears as well, you know. So here I did what I should have done with the giraffe, basically, and it's just Vitruvian bones, and I'm switching them around. But again, from the thumbnails, I knew exactly what I needed, you know. So, and here we have the sandwich. And then I came, and then I thought, you know what, this is just not enough. Let's have another, you know, kind of juxtaposition of her, and let's have her do a huge burp. And that's basically the mouse all switches. And I think I looked at some. I always liked in the older Simpsons cartoons when they would burp, you know, how their lips would flap, would do these wavy motions. So how I achieved this here is with the new liquid shapes. Actually, this is actually nothing else but just a liquid shape cutting into a red blob, so to speak. And then I just turn it around a little bit to get that little, and she goes back into that position. And again, I knew which mouth positions I needed. I knew, okay, now she should look a little bit, you know, a little bit embarrassed, and then, you know, have like hee hee. Yeah, exactly. All right, so this gives us a really good starting point. But what is the next step, you might ask? Well, now I have to go back to my presentation for a second because I think this is actually the second really important thing. The first one is to plan your stuff out. The second thing is breakdowns. Now, what is a breakdown? A breakdown to me is basically a drawing or a position or a frame, whatever you want to call it, that describes the transition between two key poses. You know, Richard Williams once said, you know, I can almost say I made my living with the breakdown drawing. That's a quote from his Animator Survival Kit, which you should all have on your shelf in the chapter on flexibility. So if you're interested, read up on that. But here's the thing, a lot of beginners, or even me, myself included, think, well, a breakdown, you know, you just put it smack bang in the middle. Breakdown is basically the middle drawing. So, and here's the other revelation. I have a nice example here from another great book. It's from Eric Goldberg's Character Animation Crash Course. And this is exactly the thing, you know, we have this dog, you know, looking from the right to the left. And you could do a breakdown just in the middle position and you would get a smooth transition, everything fine, but it would look pretty boring. What happens if we put a breakdown into timing-wise in the middle, but it is actually not the middle position, but it favors another key, you know? It favors the first key basically. So he stays much longer in the position of the first key and then switches over to looking to the left and then eases into it. And it's not, and you can do multiple breakdowns. It also doesn't mean that you only can do one breakdown. But that is really the secret sauce of I think, okay animation to something that looks a bit more magical, you know. This is more or less known as the Disney approach to animate a scene. I guess a lot of people do it that way. But let's say we have two key drawings, so two key positions in Moho here. So what would be the next step? Next step would be we break it down once, you know. So we just start fleshing the thing out, you know. What we describe how the character goes from one position to the next. Then we can go in and do a second set of breakdowns between the key and the first breakdown. And then we go in and we generate our in-betweens. So you break it down into smaller and smaller pieces, basically, until your animation works without any in-betweens, and then we go to tweening. The problem with cutout animation is, since the computer can basically interpolate so nicely for us, it's really tempting to just let him do much more of the work than it really should, you know. And especially now, where everybody's talking about AI and so on, I think it's more important than ever to really show, you know, what actually the human capacity is when it comes to that. And that is really what we leave to Moho, you know. It is not this, and everybody starts out like this. I did that too, you know. You do two keys and then you set it to smooth and then you let Moho do the rest. Another Richard Williams quote is really, there are no in-between drawings, you know, every drawing is important. And I think that's also something you kind of have to know every position of your animation by the end of it, you know. So let's try that out, right? Let's go to this little guy. And I mean, considering we don't have that much time, but I thought I definitely have to show you how I would go about this. So let's just take this first syllable here, basically. So he goes, yes, thank you. So let's just do the R. And I usually, I mean, if I'm alone in the room, I usually act things out. You know, I really go about how would I, because I already think about timing and spacing, you know. So the first thing I do is I take all of these keyframes and I colored them red here, so you can, you know, you don't get confused in the end what's a key now and what's a breakdown and in between. So let's just take these few keyframes here and we go over here and change them from step to linear. Another way to do it is Command or Control 1. Up here on the right, in the right corner, you can see what shortcuts I'm pressing, by the way. And now let's look at it, by the way, that's a linear interpolation. I usually, at least with the first few stages, I don't use smooth interpolation because again, smooth Moho already adds some easing to the stuff. And I just want complete control over what I'm doing, you know, so I usually do linear. Anyway, so let's see what Moho has done for us. Okay. Well, I mean, it works, it's smooth, all right, but it really has no character, you know. So this guy, to me, he would really go like, you know, like the posh people at parties. So, okay, that already tells us something. That tells us we basically want to be, I want to have this pose here show much longer than this one here. So now the trick is, let's go here. I go to this keyframe, go one frame back, press Command F to freeze them, and it generated some new keys for me. And now I take those and push them back. And you see, it's much more snappy now. He snaps into this Okay, that's our first breakdown, you know, and we didn't even have to do anything manually. But we can add to this, I think. Let's maybe move it a little bit forward, and we remember the chart from before. Okay, that's our first breakdown. Now let's do the breakdown in between the breakdown, because maybe it would be funny if he drags his nose. He has a big nose, you know. How about he drags his nose a little bit when he goes up? So we move him down, and maybe, I mean, counter movement is always a good thing to try out. And the nice thing about Moho is obviously, I mean, you can really experiment with this stuff. You know, I'm not a good enough animator to really get it all right in the first try. So for me, it's really helpful. Okay, let's just say he goes down first and then comes up. And you see, it's very subtle. We can make it maybe even a bit more extreme and have him. And since his head goes down, I'll pull his arm up. And let's see. And you see how nice of an arc this already gives us. And now he closes his mouth again. And I think actually that's all the breakdowns I need. So again, you don't have it. You don't have to have. Sorry, you don't have to do it that way like my chart showed. You know, whatever it takes, you know, for it to look good. But in this case, I think, well, no, I think it's fine. Okay, now he goes. Now this is basically when he ends saying but I still want him to stay as long as possible on this So I'm gonna again generate a keyframe here. I move it forward so that it's almost like he crashes down basically. His big mouth is falling down, you know, and snapping shut. I think we can even make that more extreme. Yeah, you see, boom. And now we go in between here, and I would really like it if his contrary thing from before, if his nose drags a bit upwards, and therefore I give him a few more frames maybe, so it doesn't just, well, let's see how it works. No, I think I actually want it to be snappy. Yeah. So just to, this is really, I mean, this is really a super simple example, right? But just to show you the difference, let's take all these frames that we now did manually, cut them out, and let's see again what the original thing was versus. So I'm not saying this is the greatest piece of animation ever, but I would argue that it probably has a lot more character than what we had before. And basically, that's how I go through a whole scene. You know, I take it one step at a time. I take two keys and I do my breakdowns and then see what Moho gives me. And basically, Moho is nothing else than my assistant. You know, he does the in-betweens for me, but I tell Moho, you know, break it down here and then ease it in here, ease it out there. It's also nothing of this stuff is set in stone. You know, if you feel like you have to retime one of these keys, no problem, you know, because in the old days before computers, we used to do pencil tests and then adjust our timing accordingly. It's all fine. And that's the great thing about Moho, right? That it's so iterative. It's so easy to adjust things. So you really have a lot of room to play with. At this stage, it's really like playing with dolls, basically, you know, make them move in a cool way. And once that all that stuff is done, it could look like this. Mr. Blah, 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 point Smith. And then speech bubble flies off. Let's look at it one more time. All right. I usually also set the stuff. I mean, that's another trick, you know. If we look at these final keys, you will see some of them are on 2s, some of them are on 1s. It's a good idea. I mean, at least in Western animation, usually the rule is, you know, you animate on 2s, which means, you know, 2 drawings being held. So 12 drawings per second for normal actions, and you animate on 1s, so 24 drawings per second for fast actions. You know, if you are more into anime or limited animation, that's a whole other kind of worms. But yeah, so I usually also, you know, mix that up a little bit and set certain things on 2s, certain things on 1s. And the next thing, basically the last step I do now is, okay, you know, the scene is standing basically. Now comes what I call the fluff stage, you know, everything to embellish the whole thing. So one easy thing to do in Moho is adding something called overlapping action, which basically means nothing else than don't have everything stop at the same time, which I think I'm a bit guilty of in this particular example. But let's, for example, look at this. This is a nice, easy thing. So we have him here when he hangs up his phone, and you see how his eyebrow goes up here. And the eyebrow stops basically at the same keyframe as the head. So if you want to, you know, I mean, it's okay with this character because he's a little bit of a simple thing anyway. But we could just select those bones that we want to change. And in Moho, you know, we see the red channels are now the bones that you have selected. So let's take those and just move them a little bit, maybe like a few frames forward. Well, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. Even more, actually. Yeah, it's subtle, which it should be, but just so you can see it. You see now the eyebrows basically don't stop the same as the head. You can see with the arm it's actually happening already. So his head stops, but the arm is still moving a few frames. And this is especially if we look at the girl again. I also like, you know, some things are basically just too complicated for me to animate, you know, in a key pose way, basically. And one really good example of overlapping action is this sandwich here, which basically had its own set of bones, which you can see here. And all I did basically at the beginning, I mean, it's tied to the hand switch. And at the beginning, I didn't bother animating this sandwich at all. I just animated the whole thing without the sandwich moving. And then I went through, and you can see here, it's almost every frame I moved something around, and I just animated it straight ahead. So straight ahead means you don't first do key poses, then in-betweens, then breakdowns, then in-betweens. You just go, you know, like you would in your math book at school. You just go one frame after the other and move it around. So usually that's nice for hair or fluffy things. Now, you might ask, well, why didn't you just use any sort of what are they even called? Dynamics of bone dynamics or something like that. Well, there's just two problems. First of all, as I said, I like things to be on 2s here and there because it just looks more traditional. And second of all, I don't want things to be physically correct. I want them to be, you know, emotionally correct, basically. So a sandwich would never move. I mean, if it would move like that, you definitely wouldn't want to eat it, but a sandwich would never move like that. So yeah. that's why I did it by hand. All right. I think I have to go back to my presentation for the last part before we go to questions. So just a short recap, this is the process I worked out for myself so far. Start out simple by drawing your thumbnails, take it easy, don't sweat. Time those thumbnails out on Moho and you're already half of the way there, that's the difficult work. Then plan and build your rig according to the action, make a list if that helps you. Do your keys in step mode, really break that stuff down so you don't break your brain, basically. Go in, do those breakdowns, and in between them, take one thing at a time. Every frame is important, just that's the main thing I want you to take away from this. And then you can go over the whole thing again, add additional embellishments, play with the timing, offset bones for overlapping actions, add frame by frame extras, which I haven't even shown you yet, but I can show you that afterwards if we have time. Sometimes I do a frame by frame layer and just add some, speed lines or something like that. And also remember, and this is really something people in the industry will also tell you, a rig is never really finished. There is no such thing as a finished rig. It's only ready for the next scene, basically. So make sure your rig is ready for the scene you want to animate and get animating. Just the last few tips. Tip number one, I like to think about, the great thing about Moho is really there's just like, I would say 5, 6, 7 concepts that you have to learn, and then you basically know Moho, Now the question is just how do you use these tools and concepts creatively? And if you think about all the things that make animation look great, like weight, overlapping actions, arcs, exaggeration, backwards engineer them, with the tools that Moho offers you, thanks to target bones and IK, we can get easy, weight, a sensation of weight by having the character properly place their feet on the ground, for example. Offset keys, as I said earlier. Flip a lot, as in traditional animation to see your arcs. Use mesh deformers and curvers, for example, for exaggeration. I did a little test here with the new curvers just to see how much flexibility I could get into, just a simple arm rig. This whole thing took me like half an hour to do, but just to prove the point. This is probably a little bit a controversial point, but I'm pretty convinced that cutout and traditional are just two different techniques. They're part of the same medium, but they're just a different thing, So I would say design to cut out animation strength. For example, I have a project with this green girl that you always see pop up on my socials sometimes. I plan to animate her one day. I just didn't have the time yet. And I used to draw her like this, basically. It's an okay drawing, but the problem is just that would be a hell of a lot of work and probably too much of a headache to build as a Moho rig. So I've been thinking, if I would do this as a Moho rig, how would she look, And I came up with this design. So it's really, think more about shapes than forms. Obviously form, informs how your shapes look, but it's this weird mixture between graphic design and illustration. But therefore, complexity instead of a lot of lines can be added through texture, and there were some great webinars and examples recently of that, because we don't have to redraw every frame. So yeah. Tip number 3, and I cannot tell you how much I learned from this. Forget about the software, forget which software is used. YouTube is full of great cutout animators, showing their process. And there's many great shows on TV, that use rigged characters. And all this stuff can be done in Moho without problem. Obviously Moho is the best choice and our favorite, but I'm just saying, I learned a lot about these processes from watching animators who do this professionally in the TV industry work. They didn't all use Moho, but pretty much all the concepts are applicable to Moho as well. Some of them are actually even easier to do than in other softwares. And it's really more about the methodology than so much the software. And this is funny because for some reason I was the same for a long time, and nowadays I don't know why, but it seems sometimes when I watch people rig or do stuff or start out with things, they want to avoid drawing anything at any cost, you know, so they spend years on perfecting their hand rig that can do a 360-degree and, you know, whatever, you know, really animation, at least 2D animation, will always be about drawing no matter what. So embrace it, you know. Again, now it's much easier thanks to the new freehand tools in Moho. And it's the solution to most problems, to be honest. For example, Vitruvian bones versus overcomplicated limbs, you know, because all these rigging things, they are great and everything, but you always have to think about the stage where you have to animate that thing, you know. Again, like with the giraffe, you know, I had to move these points around, lose my mind, you know, digging around in layers and timelines. If I just had a Vitruvian bone and which I could switch with basically one shortcut, it would have taken me like a fraction of the time. And lastly, I would always recommend try out traditional animation. Even it doesn't have to be anything finished, but even just some pencil tests or just play around. It's still the most direct and uncomplicated way to learn more about animation, and you will learn a lot of stuff that you can. I mean, that's actually a fun part, I think, to really you know, learn certain concepts in one technique and then think about, okay, how could I, you know, apply this to something like Moho? And again, Moho has some really cool new frame-by-frame tools, so you don't even have to switch software for that anymore. And with that, I'm actually at the end. So thank you very much, and I hope this was a little bit helpful to you, and I'm looking forward to see your work.
Well, thank you so much, Joel. This has been an amazing presentation. People loved it. So let's see.
Ooh, are you still there, Mario? I don't hear you anymore, but
Oh, sorry. I thought I was my phone had a problem. Now it's working.
okay,
Well,
no worries.
thank you so much, Dave. Joel, sorry. There was a lot of people watching us from all over the world. Thank you. I know there are different time zones. For example, from Indonesia, Dala, Ingo from Germany, Mike from Michigan, Tanya also Germany, California, Benny, Italy, Nico, Arizona, Danny, UK. So thank all of you. And let's go with some questions. We have limited time for the Q&A. We'll try to do our best. Tim Croy said, what was the hardest part of animation for you? Whether it will be physical animation, software process, or pre-production and planning?
Uh, Specifically in Moho, or the hardest part. To be honest, the hardest part was basically getting over myself because I would just overcomplicate stuff. I think I have a hard time with you know, I'm somebody. For example, I don't really like, for example, do a lot of correction smart bones, even though they're great, but simply because they would give you some, sometimes they could give you some, you know, unexpected things, weirdness going on. So I would always try to make things work as much as possible while I'm rigging it. And if something really wouldn't work, I would go in and do point animation, basically. That's always, you know, your last resort. If something doesn't work out, go in and animate the points. And I think with especially with the giraffe, that was a big struggle, because if you look at all the layers basically that are animated in here, and keeping, I mean, the more of that stuff that you have, the harder and harder it gets to retime things. So I think just keeping things simple. I like to dig around in layers as little as possible and just concentrate on the timeline once I'm animating. I don't want to see these layers anymore. I really just want to concentrate on the timeline. So yeah, that is maybe one of the hurdles, definitely. But I will say planning things out definitely made it all much more approachable.
Awesome. Well, Joel, here's another question regarding to like animation theory on traditional animation. You mentioned one book, if you can repeat it, and also if you want to add some others.
Yes, I can definitely repeat that, of course. Maybe I have an affiliate link. No, I'm just kidding. Where was it? Where was it? Ah, here. So one of them is the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. And the other one is pretty underrated, I think, but just as great, is the Character Animation Crash Course by Eric Goldberg. And Eric Goldberg is the guy at Disney who animated the Genie, for example. So those two I can really recommend. Other animation books, let me check my shelf. To be honest, nowadays, I think these two books, oh, well, okay, I mean, one, of course, I mean, the cartoon animation by Preston Blair, of course, basically taught me everything I know about drawing. But to be honest, nowadays, you know, these three books basically are the ones, are all you need about animation. And nowadays, I mean, there's so much information on YouTube, and watching people do stuff is most of it is even free. Really makes things a lot more clear. Again, if I wouldn't have, I mean, I'm not from the US, I've never been to an animation school, you know, so a lot of this thing is still kind of hard to get the information. But if I would have never seen Aaron Blaise in one of his video tutorials doing that thing, the thumbnails and blowing them up, I would have never thought of that, you know. So there's an abundance of of information everywhere. So, you know, pick and choose.
Definitely. And here's another interesting question from Dave. I like that you plan ahead and only rig what you need. But if you know that your character will need to be in more than one shot, do you design and rig each shot separately from scratch, or do you build more complexity into a single rig that can do everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's also, I mean, all of this, obviously, this whole thing that I presented as one little one little footnote, and that is that I did this all by myself. You know, if you work in a studio environment and you do a series, for example, then obviously you have a rigging department, you have the animators, and then obviously it will be more complex rigs because that's the whole point of it. Personally, I think if I would do a short, I would, again, storyboard it all first. Then I would determine from my storyboard, okay, you know what? We have 50 shots here or whatever, hopefully not 50, but we have a lot of shots here with the character standing in a 3/4 pose. So that can basically be the same master rig, you know. So I would do one rig that is maybe a little bit more complex. But for example, if you then have an upshot or something, something from a worm's eye view, I wouldn't try to shoehorn or to brute force that master rig into that perspective, but I would just, you know, do a new little rig that does exactly what it has to do for the scene. And who knows, maybe later in the whole thing you have a similar shot to that as well. It gets easier the more scenes you have. It gets easier because you can cannibalize stuff again. You know, I wouldn't have to redraw all that stuff. Basically, I could just take the layers out of my master rig and just, you know, resculpt them a little bit. And you know, be off. What I often do at work is I do much simpler stuff. You know, it's unfortunately a style that is often wanted is something like this. But I would basically, I wouldn't spend that much time on rigging. I mean, she can basically turn her head and she can turn her body, and then I would just start animating. And then I would start adjusting and adding stuff with every scene, because suddenly I have a scene and see, oh dear, I guess she has to have a second mouth here. So I would add a second mouth, and then I would go to scene 3 and import the rig from scene 2, because that rig basically already has more features than the first version. And by the end of it, I basically end up with like 10 different versions. And just, you know, for me personally, it's just important to get animating as soon as possible, because I get really, you know, I kind of get impatient with if I spend too much time rigging.
Mm-hmm. And here's another question. Do you have to rig the breakdowns with smart bones, or can you just animate them on the fly?
No, you can. Again, it really depends on what you're doing. I mean, smart bones are just a tool for you to use if you want to have, like, if you know if you basically want to deform the vectors into something, for example, the mouth or whatever. But I mean, all these I mean, the breakdowns, I didn't do anything with smart bones. I mean, I used smart bones to get to the breakdowns, but I basically do it on the fly. Yeah. I think there's two different things mixed up a little bit here, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just again, always go back to your thumbnails, see what you need, and whether you best achieve this with switch layers because you want to have the different mouth positions in a switch, or you want to do it with smart bones. That's totally up to you. That's all your creative choice. So there's no Moho police. Victor is not bursting through your door and saying you did that wrong or something like that. It's all it's all your choice basically, whatever suits the project best.
Mm-hmm. And here's another interesting question from Dante Brethold. Where do you get your inspiration and ideas from when you're storyboarding? This has always been a sticking point for me.
Yeah, look, the thing is about the creative process is really what I learned is you have to free yourself from any expectation. You just have to get into the playful mode, and that's why I like to board in these tiny little boxes basically, because there's absolutely no expectations to myself to do any sort of pretty drawings, and I would throw out a lot of drawings, but it gives me the chance and the freedom to experiment. You can always do the pretty drawings later, yeah, but just start iteratively. Start at the stage where you really have absolutely no pressure or anything, and get into that creative flow. Because it takes me 2 seconds to make one of these storyboard drawings. I don't spend 2 hours on a panel and then I realize, well, I guess it doesn't really fit that well. Better start out small and simple and try it out. What works best. It's also nice doing it in these boxes, because nowadays, storyboards are mostly also done frame by frame, but the anime storyboards are still kind of done like this, just vertically. But the nice thing about this is almost like a comic strip, right? And you get a nice sense of the flow of the whole thing. So yeah, just be kind to yourself.
Definitely. And another question is, do you use the graph mode?
No, I don't use the graph mode because yeah, actually, I heard from other cutout animators that they and their software don't use the graph mode either. And the reason why they don't use it is because they're not the only ones ever touching that animation. They animate it, then it goes off to another department, and these departments, they have to see at a glance what is going on. If you have easings and cushionings going on within the graph mode, it's basically all hidden from view. For me, it's just easier. And the same thing for me, I just want to see what's happening. I don't want to switch over there and then, what is this curve doing? What is going on? Graph modes for me are nice for motion graphics, are nice for camera movements and stuff like that. Again, it comes because I'm a frame by frame animator. For me, I just want to see boxes and spots on the timeline, basically, and not curves. Yeah.
And here's a doubt. How do you add those yellow markers and text on the timeline?
These ones, yeah, that's pretty simple. You just, yeah, I should have actually mentioned that. These markers just basically tell me what he's saying at any specific point. Very simple. You just go to whatever you move your playhead to whatever frame you want. You go over here, add marker, and you say, "Great webinar, good," and click OK. And here it is. And you can also change the color. Let's make it green. Yeah, those are pretty helpful as well, just to to keep an overview of where you're at, or for lip sync especially.
And here's a question from Rodney Arkey. To make your work feel more like traditional animation, are you always animating on 2s or 3s?
Personally, on 2s, because I'm really very much I'm too shoehorned into the Western tradition. Basically, I wish my influences were more on the anime side growing up, but unfortunately, they just simply weren't. It was really old, Western cartoons. So for me, I think in 2s, I time stuff in 2s. But if you look at anime, I would always recommend, going on YouTube, look at your favorite animation and use the period and comma key to go through it frame by frame. And the anime people, they are really masters at varied frame rates, because they will have some stuff on 3s and the next frame would be on 1 basically, and then it's a 5, and it all works. When played back at 24 frames per second, it suddenly all works. I'm probably just too simple-minded for that, so I just keep things on 2s and 1s.
Well, unfortunately, our time is limited, but I'm gonna leave you if you want to say a last tip or suggestion to our audience.
Go out and create. Though I think just you know, Moho is really. I have a few friends now who I turn to Moho, and it always looks daunting at first, you know, but really don't get too intimidated of all this technical looking stuff. It's really not as technical as you might think, and in the end, it's a creative tool. So approach it from a creative side and not from a technical point of view, and then it can really be a great addition to your tool set.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for those wise words. People loved your presentation. A lot of messages, like, for example, Roxanne, thank you. Ingo, thank you. That was great. Lauren, thank you. Cynthia, fantastic webinar. So thank all of you who joined us live. I know there are a lot of time zones now, people watching it on the afternoon, the morning, or late at night. So thanks all of you for watching us live.
Thank you.
And before we go, I'm just going to share one last bit of information. Well, the future is 2D. Moho is a powerful 2D animation software that combines the most powerful animation technology with state-of-the-art professional animation tools. Draw, rig, and animate easily. You can create your characters directly in Moho with its vector tools optimized for animation, or import images or Photoshop files, keeping the link and layering structure. For more information, visit our website, mohoanimation.com. Also, we invite you to join our socials. Our community is really active. Also on our Discord, lostmarble.com/Discord, and also our forum. Join us on socials. Also, for more information about Joel, don't forget to follow him on Joel Mayer Art on Instagram, Joel Mayer Prods on Twitter X, or his YouTube channel, Joel Mayer Prods, and his website. And as many of you asked, this webinar it's been recorded and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel as Moho Animation. So don't forget to subscribe and please stay tuned in our socials for more webinars, information, also community animation. So stay tuned and we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much, Joel, for this amazing webinar. If you're still around. And
Oh,
thank
so
all of
I'm
you.
sorry. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was distracted for a second drinking a glass of water.
So once again, thank you so much. Thank all of you and see you next time. Bye bye.
See ya. Bye.